So, I mean, and I think that's just a natural consequence of going from what the Lark provides, which is kind of like the space and the resources to kind of understand your own play, you know, and figure out, you know, the nuts and bolts of it. And what's happening on the level of the Kirk-Douglas with Moises was a much more kind of like collaborative and artistic kind of blooming of all that. And I couldn't have had the second part without the first part. And so at every step of the way, I feel like I've been really, really fortunate with this play, you know, to have the Lark and then to have the Kirk-Douglas and to have, you know, the support of the other organizations, and then to have the Mark Taper production, which also, like, I ended up doing a ton of rewriting through that, even though it had been very well received and I was very happy with the play. As we moved on to that new space, a lot of new questions had arose in the next year. And I actually don't think I'm finished writing it. You know, I think that there's still things that I can focus on. I don't think they'll be very dramatic, but I think that, like, you know, the more opportunity you have to work on a piece, the more questions might probably arise from it. And if you're lucky enough to have the resources and the kind of surrounding artists that are willing to invest in those changes, you know, my opinion is just, you know, continue to let the piece grow.
And you know, this is so interesting, and then I'm going to open this up for you all to ask questions, but I'm just going to ask kind of one more thing. And you know, I remember when David Dower sent me this grant to look at. I think David, I don't remember this phone call, but you said, "Will you take a look at these guidelines?" And I called you and I said, you know, this is great. The development path thing is a really cool idea because there's this whole thing in applying for the grant that you had to create a development path, which is something, you know, was very unusual for a grant. And I said, but it's not enough money, David. You got to come up with more money. I mean, what are they going to, you know, it's not enough to support the path that people is going to create. And then what I realized in reading all your projects was that with the planning ahead of time in this kind of development path, you all thought incredibly big, even though it wasn't about the money. And I heard this from, you know, Todd and David this afternoon. It's not about the money. It's about the support and the, you know, the collaborators and the feedback. And any of you can answer this question, but just, you know, what was it? How did the writing of the grant and creating that development path change how you know, how you thought about the work?
We definitely thought big. I mean, and it was. It was through there was a lot of fundraising that came after the grant too. TCG helped send us to Bulgaria, and an amazing use of frequent flyer miles also helped send us to Bulgaria. But yeah, just thinking big like that, I might have cobbled together some of that process for myself over time with like little grant applications and stuff like that, but nothing quite so cohesive.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I mean, for us, I think exactly the same. Like, it allowed us to think really big, but it actually covered that very first workshop production. And then the rule was, if we run out of money, we stop. Like, this was not going to be a project where we were just going to come hell or high water, it's going to happen. You know, it was like, if there's no money, then we do the other show for a while. And then if more money shows up for this one, great. And it was because we got this grant, it was a calling card, it helped us get more money to continue development. So, you know, we did part 1 with the MPDP and part 2 with the University of Texas New Musical Theater Initiative, and part 3 with the Orchard Project, and part 4 with the NEA. And so now we're coming around to the premiere, and now we have a producing partner and funds to actually see the thing all the way through. So that, like, it did get us thinking. We would never have done the performance party thing. We would have never thought about all of that stuff if we hadn't had enough money to just blow it all on the first workshop production of, you know, 5 scenes of the show, and also this other huge idea we had. So it was very useful in that way.
That's very cool. Well, let me open it up. Do people have questions? I think there's microphones on either side that you have to walk toward. Yes.
Can I ask a question? Just going to let you know. Why don't you come to the mic so that people who are watching can see and hear what you have, your question. Okay, so come on down.
I think we were crystal clear.
Okay, nobody's tired yet. Is that what you're trying to articulate? All good ideas have been. Not a question. All right, I've never.
That's a testament to the clarity of our.
We are done.
To the excellence, yes, yes, the excellence in conversation.
Oh,
That's
World's best moderator.
it's all been said.
Here we go. Somebody's going to save me. Pardon? I don't time the questions. I've intimidated people. Go ahead.
Hi there. Pete Miller. I'm a board member at Woolly Mammoth Theater here in D.C. And so I observe a lot of artistic decisions and make none. But a thing that we have been sort of groping our way to, partly in work with Eric Booth over the last few months, is the notion of trying very hard to identify an entry point for each new production that we're doing that would help, like a sentence or two that would be a core of explaining the work to someone, getting someone ready to see it, building the surrounding materials around that concept? Or does that feel like we're trying to serve you by bringing you a good audience that's ready to have the experience?
That was a loaded question. I have no answer for that, by the way. I just thought I'd say that.
I think there's a necessity there. I think it's. I always struggle when anyone asks me to write a pitch or a blurb for any play. It's like the hardest thing for me to write, and it's the hardest thing for me to kind of it is there is a feel of it being a reductive statement, but so what? I think that if that it's just one statement, and I think that there's if it's like bait. And so anything that can expand the life of the piece and get more people interested in it, even if we as the artist might find it irritating or difficult, I think it's one of those things that you kind of have to just go with.
Hi. It's interesting.
Diane,
Yes, Diane Rodriguez from Center Theater Group. And the thing with Rajiv's play, which was interesting, is that we read it pretty much after the Lark was developing it, and we held it we said we're going to produce it, and it was in like a year, and surprisingly, it has gone all the way. I mean, not surprisingly, it's gone all the way. And when we did the application for the NAA, it was hard to think what development track was going on because it had already been pretty much developed. And so we tried to be as honest as we could that there was probably not going to be a whole lot of development track. And then what happened was that once we went into the process and actually got in the rehearsal room, there was a lot to be developed. With Rude Max, I saw it really 3/4 into development, and it felt like, wow, they just need to finish it. And so it was another point of entry, so much later. And so I think it's interesting that you can. I don't have a question. I'm actually going to. I'm actually commenting.
We had a plan for the likes of her.
But interesting that you can enter work at various stages and still be able to develop them and support them, and I love that about these two pieces. So that's it.
Thanks, Diane.
Hi. So my question is, it was really interesting hearing all of the, who I am. Hi, I'm Camila Forbes, to the camera. Camila Forbes at the Hip Hop Theater Festival. And my feet are on my mark. Okay. So my question is, it was really interesting hearing all of the creative collaborators in each of the pieces along the development tracks. And and as we all know, and running our own companies and or institutions, each institution also has their different institutional priorities and or I don't want to say agendas because that sounds so malicious, but you know what I mean, priorities as it relates to your piece. And I'm wondering, were there any challenges that came up along the way, and if so, how did you negotiate those challenges as to not disrupt your artistic process? Does that make sense?
Well, in the case of the Provenance of Beauty, Melanie organized a lot of interviews in the community, and those people took us on their own tours of the neighborhood and pointed out things that they liked. When I went to write, I realized that in the beginning I had this sense of anxiety that I was being guided by those people towards advertising stuff that they wanted to be advertised or to be showcased. And so I definitely had to step back from any kind of investment in what was told to me and really find my own way in eventually. So even though I really appreciated the sort of educational aspect of the beginning of the development, there was a point where you kind of have to let it go.
I had such a nurturing bunch of people that I don't think there were too many agendas, except for possibly Jack Ruler not wanting to play to suck because he was going to produce it. But when I went to Bulgaria, what was interesting was that I encountered a process, and I went there to encounter it, a process so very different from the American process that for a couple of days I was like, oh no, I'm so irrelevant. And then I had to sit back and embrace that I was irrelevant because that's what I came to learn. So that sort of, I don't know, that sort of falls in that world.
Other questions? Oh, there, Amy.
Hi. My name is Amy Mueller, and I am from the Playwrights Foundation in San Francisco. I've been struck tonight, and also sort of throughout the whole process over the last couple of years, at the transparency of the development process. You know, we've gotten to read blogs that you wrote, Aditi, and see live feed from the Rudmacks and all kinds of different aspects of the rehearsal process and the development path itself. And where, you know, conceptually, I thought that was a phenomenal idea and wonderful. I was wondering, I was really curious if anybody wanted to talk about what it was actually like to have that.
That was the only note, the only feedback I gave to Vijay.